have fire on board. I confirm, fire on board.
Feeling a bit anxious during takeoff? You're not alone. It's a critical phase of flying, where even the slightest mishap can have catastrophic consequences. From stunning warplanes encountering dramatic failures to nerve-wracking moments for passenger flights, join us as we show you 20 plane takeoff failures caught on camera. Number 20. Taxiway troubles. Pilots occasionally need reminding that open taxiways are highways for aircraft, not runways for takeoff. Legendary pilot Chesley Sullenberger made that mistake as a rookie aviator once, and a recent flyer at a Texas air park risked embarrassment to repeat the error. Attempting departure from Lampasas Airport, the pilot theorized angling into a stiff wind over the taxiway would provide needed lift for his single-engine Cessna. A noble idea, but theory failed to match reality as near hurricane-force winds dragged his tail left and bounced the hapless plane through a gauntlet of trees onto a roadside embankment, all caught on video. Thankfully, the pilot was uninjured in the ordeal, aside from some lost pride. Investigators cited improper risk assessment and inadequate pre-flight planning as factors in the demoralizing crash. The Cessna's airframe endured major damage, and the pilot earned himself a crash course on the difference between taxi lanes and runways. Still, he's lucky to have escaped injury, thanks to robust engineering and Providence's grace. Not every aviator who gambles with the forces of physics ends their day walking away whole. It's a lesson all pilots must take to heart. Number 19. Fatal Boeing crash in Colombia. A shocking air disaster unfolded at an airport in Puerto Carreno, Colombia, when an Aero Sucre Airlines Boeing 727 crashed during takeoff, leaving only one survivor out of 6 people aboard. The cargo jet was departing on a domestic flight in December 2016, when it overran the runway at high speed. Video shows the aircraft hurtling through the airport's perimeter fence and struggling to gain altitude. After 2 minutes aloft, it clipped trees and a power line before crashing upside down. Investigations found the airport was too compact for a large Boeing jet. Moreover, the pilots used improper takeoff techniques and the plane was overloaded. But the root cause was Aero Sucre's failure to update the 727's outdated flight manual with required takeoff speeds. Following the crash, Aero Sucre faced widespread criticism for major safety oversights leading to the tragedy. Losing only one engine, the pilots could have recovered safely had they used proper procedures. Ultimately, it was a preventable disaster stemming from the airline's cost-cutting measures and safety lapses. Number 18. Ejecting from the intruder. Naval aviation means mastering the most complex aircraft under the most demanding conditions. But even talented pilots can face gut-wrenching dilemmas when technology fails and options evaporate at low altitudes. That harrowing scenario confronted a Navy aviator recently during an ill-fated takeoff attempt in an A-6 intruder attack plane. Seconds into the roll, disaster struck as an engine failure crippled the jet's acceleration. With the remaining thrust unable to safely get airborne, the pilot faced an impossible choice: crash with the stricken bomber or eject and destroy the extremely valuable aircraft. With split-second decisiveness, the flyer chose life over hardware and pulled the ejection handles as the intruder lumbered down the runway. He and his bombardier shot safely away, while the wayward bomber skidded to a halt in the grass beside the pavement. It was a crushing loss of an irreplaceable veteran airplane, but the pilot deserves immense credit for prioritizing lives over hardware in the direst of situations. His quick thinking turned sure catastrophe into 0 fatalities. There will always be other aircraft, but aviators only get one life aloft. As this intruder crew can gratefully attest, sound judgment and superior training triumph when disaster looms low and fast. Number 17. Crash in the woods. Flying classic aircraft offers pilots the chance to appreciate aviation's rich history firsthand. But attempting to launch a vintage bird from an improvised runway carries substantial risks, as one Swedish daredevil recently discovered. The elderly pilot chose to depart not from a proper airstrip, but from an ad hoc meadow hewn. After throttling up his Antonov An-2 biplane, the aviator struggled to get the lumbering aircraft airborne before the modest pasture ran out. Unfortunately, he misjudged badly. The antiquated Antu bashed through treetops before crashing ignominiously back to Earth, thankfully in one piece. Built like flying tanks, Antonov's iconic Antu planes were designed to endure rugged early Soviet service. This fortitude likely saved the day. While the pilot's decision to attempt to take off from the farm was deeply unwise, the robust Russian engineering protected him from paying the ultimate price for his foolishness. It should be considered as a case study on the perils of misusing vehicles outside their performance limitations. Had he attempted the same antics in a modern plane, the results could easily have been fatal. Let us hope this pilot has learned to show proper respect for the engineering that spared his life and chooses his runways more carefully in the future. Number 16. Bird strikes. Aircraft engines and birds don't mix well. That was the unfortunate lesson for two flights recently. A Southwest Airlines 737 leaving Las Vegas and an Indian Air Force Jaguar departing Ambala Air Base. In both incidents, bird strikes inflicted engine failure, presenting the crews with immediate emergencies right after takeoff. On Southwest Flight 3702, a bird downed the right engine as the 737 climbed away from Las Vegas on New Year's Eve. Quick-thinking pilots immediately aborted the takeoff and safely returned the aircraft to the gate under its remaining power. Days prior and across the globe, an IAF Jaguar encountered a similar situation after sucking birds into an engine on climb-out. With only one working power plant remaining, the pilot jettisoned his external fuel tanks and practice bombs to reduce weight, then adeptly landed the fighter safely. These events underscore the ever-present hazard birds pose to aircraft engines. While collisions are rare, they're extremely dangerous when they do occur. Pilots train extensively for engine-out emergencies, but real-world bird strikes are high-stakes challenges. The talent exhibited by these crews prevented catastrophe and saved lives. Their composure and skill in the face of calamity should be commended and emulated widely. Number 15. Florida fiasco. A Cessna 172 airplane isn't the usual cause of rubbernecking on Florida's roads. But recently, drivers in Orlando found themselves gawking at an unusual traffic hazard when a stricken four-seater piped up on Route 50 after apparent engine failure forced the pilot to improvise an emergency landing. Amateur video shows the plane gliding treetop height over 6 lanes of highway before pancaking down on the road's grassy median. Miraculously, no vehicles were struck, and the pilot walked away uninjured from the dramatic forced landing. Investigators believe mechanical issues during a short practice flight caused the power loss that forced the pilot's unconventional landing. Though the aircraft suffered extensive damage, the pilot deserves praise for creative thinking under pressure that averted a potential tragedy. Still, the incident provides a potent reminder to remain vigilant when flying, driving, or doing anything else with kinetic energy in the Sunshine State. Florida's warm climate and flat terrain invite aviation misadventures, but gravity always extracts its pound of flesh in the end. Thankfully today, the only carnage was a battered plane and the highway traffic jam that followed once eager drivers slowed for a look. Number 14. Plane in the sea. In a shocking event that sent ripples across the Royal Navy, one of Britain's newest and most advanced fighter jets plunged into the Mediterranean Sea after failing to take off properly from the HMS Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier. It was a routine operation in the crisp morning hours over the international seas. The HMS Queen Elizabeth, the pride of the English fleet, was conducting flight operations with its fleet of F-35 stealth fighter jets. These were no ordinary warplanes. The Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II jets are the most sophisticated in the world, combining radar-evading stealth technology with supersonic speeds. But that morning, one of the British F-35 pilots found themselves in an unprecedented catastrophe. As the pilot roared down the flight deck, the Lightning failed to accelerate up the ramp. Video footage showed the jet slowly drifting forward before suddenly tipping over the edge of the deck. The nose-diving jet hit the water a few seconds later, disappearing below the waves in a tremendous splash. For the Royal Navy, it was a shocking debacle. Each F-35 jet costs over 100 million British pounds. For context, That's enough to buy 300 regular family homes in the English countryside. And the country had just lost one of its 8 prized F-35s, among the newest in its fleet. The pilot thankfully ejected and parachuted down to safety before the jet sank into the depths. But it was still a serious loss for British air capabilities. The UK military tried to keep a lid on the incident, but video of the dramatic crash leaked out on social media. While the details were murky, it seemed the F-35 struggled to gain enough thrust and speed for takeoff. Some pointed to possible mechanical issues with the jet or human error on the pilot's part. Royal Navy officials stressed it was just a routine mission over international waters and that an inquiry was underway. But the fact remained. A hugely expensive cutting-edge warplane had essentially driven off the edge of an aircraft carrier. Number 13. Engine anomaly. Passengers aboard an Airbus. A330 got the shock of their lives when their plane suddenly swerved and aborted takeoff halfway down the runway. The airplane was taking off from an airport when it reached a speed of 105 knots. But before the wheels left the ground, the aircraft made an abrupt and unnerving turn to the right. In that instant, a loud bang rang out and trails of smoke poured from the jet's engine. Inside the cockpit, warning alarms were blaring as the pilots realized one of the engines had failed catastrophically. They had no choice but to hit the brakes, bringing the heavy jet screeching to a halt in a matter of seconds. It turned out a major internal turbine blade had broken apart inside the right engine, causing it to rapidly disintegrate. All the passengers and 11 crew members were evacuated safely from the disabled aircraft. But it was a close shave. An engine failing at high speeds during takeoff is an aviation worst-case scenario. Jet engines work by sucking in massive amounts of air mixed with fuel to generate blasts of hot expanding gases that propel the plane forward. But if a fan blade inside the engine breaks off, it can cause a chain reaction of damage. The engine's delicate internal balance of spinning rotors is thrown off, leading to violent vibrations and engine components smashing about unrestrained. This forces the pilots to abort takeoff immediately before the crippled plane leaves the ground, hoping the brakes can get them stopped in time. It takes nerves of steel and intense training to handle such an emergency. Number 12. Airliner takeoff troubles. It was a passenger plane's worst nightmare, failing to take off properly, despite racing down the lengthy runway at full speed. That's the harrowing scenario that played out as captured in a tense video that spread rapidly across the aviation world. The aircraft slowly began rolling as if being towed, moving far slower than a snail's pace. The nose lifted prematurely off the tarmac, but the main body lagged behind. For a few nail-biting moments, the plane didn't seem to be getting the lift needed for takeoff. It then stalled unexpectedly before the engines finally kicked into high gear. What exactly caused the shocking delay? It's a puzzle even for aviation experts. Some theorize the flap settings were improperly configured or the pilots mixed up the speeds. Mistakes like that seem unlikely with today's advanced avionics. Other experts wonder if mechanical issues like throttle problems bogged down the aircraft. One thing is certain, the pilots deserve immense credit. Rather than slam on the brakes in a panic, they kept their cool. Dropping the nose to gather speed, they coaxed the aircraft to accelerate to a screaming velocity of over 200 miles per hour, generating the lift for the plane to claw into the air. While the takeoff was deeply flawed, the pilots averted total disaster with nerves of steel. Number 11. Crash in Cowtown. In a stunning incident captured on video, a U.S. military fighter jet crashed and burst into flames after failing to properly take off from a naval base. The dramatic mishap took place at the Naval Air Station Joint Reserve Base in Fort Worth, Texas. An F-35B Lightning, II supersonic stealth jet, was attempting a takeoff from the naval runway. But shortly after hitting the gas, the advanced fighter swerved violently to the right as if hit by an invisible force. The jet's nose pitched down sharply before it bounced and flipped over onto the tarmac. The aircraft skidded upside down amidst sparks and flames at the edge of the runway. Amazingly, the pilot managed to eject just before the crash, parachuting down safely. The F-35B is the short takeoff and vertical landing variant of the radar-evading F-35 stealth jet used by multiple branches of the US military. But this F-35B never got the chance to showcase its nimble takeoff abilities. The cause of the Fort Worth incident remains unclear. The F-35 is notoriously expensive, making any accident a costly mistake. Some experts theorize the pilot may have mishandled the unique liftoff procedures for the F-35B's vertical takeoff capacity, or there may have been a mechanical failure with the lift fan or flight controls. No matter the cause, the crash delivered a vivid reminder of the dangers inherent in both military and civilian aviation. Even routine takeoffs can go disastrously wrong in an instant, turning the most advanced jets into raging fireballs. Number 10, Smokey in Vegas. They say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but that wasn't the case recently for the passengers of JetBlue Flight 178. The early morning flight was scheduled to depart Las Vegas for Boston, but its takeoff roll was abruptly cut short when smoke began billowing from one of the Airbus A320's engines. With visions of fire and brimstone no doubt flashing through their minds, the terrified travelers were surely uttering prayers of thanks as the pilots aborted the takeoff and brought the smoldering aircraft safely back to the gate. Ground personnel immediately converged on the plane and contained what turned out to be a relatively minor engine fire. After an inspection, it was determined that the source of the smoke was an oil leak in the turbine section. While any in-flight fire is cause for alarm, in this instance the alert pilots and rapid response teams prevented a far more serious emergency. For air travelers, engine failures and fires represent a primal fear, rooted in our instinctive understanding that as humans, we are simply not meant for unpowered flight. Visions of a wing engulfed in flames or an engine detaching at 30,000 feet are the stuff of nightmares. Fortunately, modern airliners have redundant safety systems designed to contain failures and give pilots options should the unthinkable occur. Number 9, going nose down. Picture an airliner drifting slowly down the runway, its nose gear twisted sideways by a full 90 degrees. It's an unnatural sight, like a bird frozen in mid-flap. Now imagine that impossible scene is real, and you're one of 147 anxious passengers aboard the aircraft as it prepares for landing. For travelers on a recent LATAM Airlines flight in Colombia, this was their hair-raising reality when a mechanical failure left the plane's front wheels askew. Incredibly, the skilled pilots were able to safely land the crippled aircraft using only differential power and delicate control inputs. As unnerving as the experience must have been for those on board, it's a testament to the airmanship of crews that modern jets can suffer such failures and still bring their passengers home intact. However, the incident highlights the fact that landings are exercises in precision. With no room for error, nose gear malfunctions at touchdown can quickly escalate from inconvenient to catastrophic. Thankfully, this crew had ample time to prepare, having discovered the issue while still airborne. Other pilots may not be so lucky to have a warning of impending prang. Number 8, runway run-in. Every pilot dreads the possibility of an engine failure. Simulations and training help prepare for such an emergency, but nothing fully replicates the experience of guiding a stricken aircraft back down to solid ground. Recently, a pilot flying over Washington state faced this real-world trial by fire when his small plane's engine gave out mid-flight, forcing an impromptu landing on a busy highway. Footage shows the dramatic incident as the single-engine KR-2 swiftly descended from the sky and maneuvered over traffic before touching down gently on the rural highway. Coming in low over power lines and treetops, the pilot's skill was admirable. He narrowly avoided cars, trucks, and civilians to pull off a smooth landing despite the improvised runway. The Federal Aviation Administration confirmed the aircraft lost power due to a fuel system failure. This transformed the aircraft into an unpowered glider, presenting a dire emergency scenario. Thankfully, the pilot responded with poise and preparation. His successful highway landing demonstrated clarity of thought and decisive action under immense pressure, traits all aviators should aspire to emulate. Safe landings are a pilot's chief responsibility. This gutsy landing on an arbitrary interstate marks a victory of training and composure over adversity. Drivers that day were treated to a unique sight, while the pilot himself earned bragging rights for a lifetime. Not many can claim to have brought their aircraft down on a wing, a prayer, and a freeway. Number 7. Skydiving surprise. A routine skydiving trip turned terrifying recently when the Cessna Caravan carrying 17 jumpers and pilots lost power shortly after takeoff in California. Unable to maintain altitude, the aircraft rapidly descended tail first before clipping a truck and crashing upside down in a vineyard. Against all odds, the 17 skydivers and pilot escaped mostly unscathed from the inverted fuselage, suffering only minor injuries. It was a remarkable outcome after such a catastrophic failure and violent off-runway excursion. The stunned skydivers credited Providence and their pilot's prowess for the miraculously positive outcome. One passenger's GoPro video captured the entire ordeal, from engine failure through the plane's uncontrolled descent and violent impact with the ground. That such a catastrophic sequence of events could produce so few injuries is astonishing. Aviation experts praised the pilot's composure and skill in managing the emergency. Avoiding obstacles and putting the stricken aircraft down in the vineyard doubtlessly saved lives. The video offers a sobering case study of crisis control when all seems lost. The tragedy was narrowly averted thanks to this pilot's steady hand and quick thinking under extraordinary pressure. It just goes to show that calm rationality can triumph even when everything is going wrong at 9.8 meters per second squared. Number 6. Mojave Miracle. The majestic Mojave offers some of the most breathtaking scenery in the American Southwest, but for 2 impromptu flyers recently, it provided something far more valuable: open space for an emergency landing when their aircraft unexpectedly lost power. With no power and few options, the pilot ultimately succeeded in gliding the stricken aircraft to an emergency landing in the harsh Mojave Desert. The plane had taken off from Needles, California, destined for Chino, when it lost oil pressure in the engine at around 8,500 feet. With oil unavailable to lubricate internal components, the engine first sputtered, then seized up entirely. The propeller slowed to a stop, leaving the aircraft effectively adrift. Checklists and troubleshooting efforts proved fruitless as the plane steadily descended. With no airports within reach for an emergency landing, the pilot aimed for a remote stretch of desert salt flats ringed by mountains. Other than sagebrush and sand, it was not an ideal landing zone. In-cockpit video captures the tense moments as the plane nears the unforgiving desert floor. Lined up on final approach, the pilot skillfully coasts just feet over small shrubs and rocks before the wheels chatter onto the coarse sands. The plane swerves slightly before coasting to a stop. While the landing was harsh, it was highly controlled given the difficult circumstances. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. You know, some planes are equipped to land on water. A seaplane is a powered fixed-wing aircraft designed for takeoffs and landings on water. Seaplanes are quite common, but in a surprising incident in December 2019, a massive KLM 747 attempted to channel its inner seaplane and nearly landed on beachgoers at Maho Beach in St. Martin. Maho Beach is famous for its proximity to Princess Juliana International Airport. The plane flew unusually low and close to the shore, prompting people to duck or hastily retreat. Fortunately, there were no serious injuries as the pilot managed to control it successfully, landing it on the runway nearby. However, the plane created a strong jet blast that blew some people and their belongings into the water. Have you ever experienced the thrill of witnessing unexpected takeoff failures or landings? Share your experiences in the comments below. Number 5. Highway landing. Going from cruising comfortably in the clouds to careening toward an interstate at terminal velocity tests the mettle of even the most steely-nerved pilot. But an anonymous aviator recently passed that daunting trial with flying colors when he safely landed his stricken aircraft on a busy highway in Washington state after dual-engine failure. The single-engine KR-2 plane had taken off earlier that day before losing power, forcing the pilot to improvise an emergency landing in unconventional terrain. Lining up with the straight highway, he glided the powerless aircraft on a perfectly controlled descent. Footage shows the dramatic touchdown as the pilot slowly guided his plane over trucks and between bridges before pulling off a smooth landing just feet away from stunned motorists. Miraculously, no vehicles were struck, and no injuries occurred as he brought the crippled craft to rest on the roadside gravel. Investigators say a fuel issue caused both engines to cut out, turning the aircraft into an unpowered glider. Lacking alternatives, the pilot demonstrated remarkable precision and composure to reach the highway and thread the needle between hazards before bringing it down safely. An unconventional runway, high stakes, and long odds didn't deter this flyer from finding a way to cheat fate and walk away intact. That's a true pilot's pilot, one whose skills deserve international acclaim and a movie option once he's identified. Because pulling off a no-engines highway landing while dodging bridges and big rigs, that's the aviation equivalent of a moonshot. Number 4, the miracle on the Hudson. Brace for impact are 3 words air passengers never want to hear. But on a frigid January day in 2009, those ominous commands rang out in the cabin of U.S. Airways Flight 1549, shortly after takeoff from New York's LaGuardia Airport. Moments earlier, the Airbus A320 had flown headlong into a flock of Canadian geese while climbing away from LaGuardia, ingesting birds and filling engines with feathered doom. With both power plants knocked out, seasoned Captain Chesley "Sully" Sullenberger took stock of his grim options. Unable to reach any runway, his only recourse was attempting a daring emergency ditching in the Hudson River. As passengers donned life vests and assumed crash positions, Sully banked the crippled jet over the George Washington Bridge and lined up his descent trajectory for the chilly Hudson below. With nerves of steel, he flared expertly and brought the Airbus down on the water's surface, pulling off an aviation miracle that resulted in 0 passenger fatalities from an otherwise catastrophic double bird strike. Dubbed the Miracle on the Hudson, Sully's historic water landing stands today as one of the most remarkable feats of piloting ever recorded. Number 3, falling from the sky. Here's a novel new take on the classic chicken falling from the sky joke. Kirby Clements was shoveling snow outside his Colorado home when a large chunk of metal debris fell from the heavens and smashed onto his pickup truck. Concerned it might have been an aircraft part, Clements called the FAA to investigate. As it turns out, his hunch was right. The mangled metal hunk was identified as a broken engine nacelle panel from a Boeing 777 bound for Hawaii. Somehow, the 3-foot-wide fragment had detached from the United Airlines flight after takeoff from Denver and taken an impromptu skydive into Clements' neighborhood. Miraculously, the falling wreckage didn't hit any locals, but it did tenderize Clements' Dodge Ram, leaving it with a hefty dent. He and other homeowners in the area have already contacted United about compensation. Meanwhile, officials are investigating how such a failure could occur. This strange incident shows that unexpected dangers still lurk when taking to the skies in metal tubes propelled by controlled explosions. Clements may have been lucky this time, but United needs to take steps to ensure its engines don't rain random debris across the American heartland. No one wants United to give new meaning to the term flyover country. Number 2, Cessna engine failure drill. Flying a light aircraft like the Cessna 152 requires immense precision and skill, especially in emergency situations. This was demonstrated vividly in a video showing engine failure drill exercises in a 2-seat Cessna. The footage highlights the sheer finesse and steady hand needed to glide the plane down safely if the engine cuts out mid-flight. The pilot begins by reducing the throttle and simulating a sudden loss of engine power. With the propeller windmilling uselessly, the plane starts rapidly bleeding off airspeed and altitude. The pilot is forced to act fast to avoid an impending stall and crash. Gently raising the nose, the aviator guides the stricken aircraft into a controlled descent, aiming for the distant runway. It's a delicate balancing act to maintain lift without airspeed while lining up the runway approach. Hitting that tiny strip of pavement is the only hope of survival. Unlike jets, small planes have no complex systems to fall back on. When the solitary engine quits, the pilot must take over manually. This requires mastering the intricacies of pitch angles, glide slopes, flap settings, and more. Additionally, they must time the landing approach perfectly, touching down on speed on the runway threshold. Too slow or too fast could be disastrous. Executing a flawless power-off landing takes extensive training and experience. But engine failures, while rare, do happen. Weather conditions, fuel issues, mechanical problems, or bird strikes can all force a plane to switch into gliding mode. By drilling emergency procedures until they become second nature, pilots develop the life-saving skills to handle these risky scenarios. Number 1. Chopper chaos. Police helicopters perform vital public service duties every day across the nation. But recently, one of Little Rock's finest found itself in an unplanned early retirement when it unexpectedly spun out of control on the ground and careened into a violent crash. A camera captured the entire incident as the chopper sat parked on a trailer while a mechanic attempted to start the engine. Suddenly, an errant wind gust spins the rotor head out of control. The tail rotor takes flight, and the ship rolls right before smashing down inverted on the tarmac in a maelstrom of flying debris. Miraculously, the retired officer aboard escaped with non-life-threatening injuries despite being knocked unconscious. Investigators cited unpredictable wind conditions as the culprit, saying the mechanic attempted to apply the brakes but couldn't compensate for the sudden weather change. It just goes to show, rotary wing aircraft are complex beasts, spinning cocoons of whirling blades even while parked. A nimbus of physics, aerodynamics, and human judgment must align to keep helicopters safely aloft and on the ground. When any factor misaligns, disaster can ensue at lightning speed. Thankfully for this chopper's occupants, fortune favored the bold, and no lives were lost. A happy ending, considering the aircraft itself now only exists in pieces scattered across the Little Rock tarmac. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.